Howie, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us for a bit. First of all, a lot of people in Denmark, even like political pundits, have probably not even heard that there is an actual alternative to voting Trump or Biden. So how about you start by introducing yourself a little bit?
Sure. I'm a retired Teamster. I've worked in warehouses and construction sites, but I've been a movement activist since the 1960s, civil rights, anti-Vietnam War, the early ecology movement, and became convinced back then that we needed a party for working people, people that want peace, want to protect the environment. Back in the 60s, the two major parties were dragging their feet on civil rights, and then they escalated in Vietnam. So I'm asking, where's my party? And there were some early third party efforts, Peace and Freedom Party, People's Party, Citizens Party, very much like the Green Party, sort of coming out of the New Left. In 1984, we had a meeting to organize the Green Party. I was there and stayed active. Greens ran me 3 times for governor of New York, each time getting enough votes to get a ballot line, which is a real problem in this country. It's off the charts compared to other countries, how hard it is to even get on the ballot. And I guess because I did a pretty good job in those governor's races, Greens around the country asked me to run for president, which I wasn't planning to do, but here I am.
Okay, so that kind of fell into your lap, or how long have you been preparing to run for president?
I was never preparing. I have focused. I mean, New York State, where I live, is as big as most European countries. And that's challenge enough, you know, to run in a country of, what is it now, 330 million with, you know, great cultural and regional diversity, 50 states, each with their own election laws. Each party has its own, you know, each Green Party affiliate has its own bylaws. I had to run through 47 primaries to get the nomination.
Okay.
That was more complicated than it was for the Democrats and Republicans, who consolidated their primaries like Super Tuesday and Big Tuesday.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it was like twice a week I'm running a primary. So it's like running 47 local elections in order to get into the national election.
Yeah, okay. So so this campaign has been going on for a while, I gather. But I've been reading a little bit about your partner, or your vice presidential candidate, Angela Walker. I'm thinking, since we don't have her on the line, would you maybe say a couple of words about Angela and what her profile is? As I gather, she describes herself as a Fred Hampton, Assata Shakur tradition socialist, which sounds good to me, but maybe you could elaborate a little on who she is.
Well, she's a veteran labor and racial justice activist. I first found out about her in 2014 when she was asked to run for sheriff of Milwaukee County, where this right-wing Democrat named David Clark, who's actually a Trump supporter, had a slogan of "Don't call 911, the emergency line, get a gun." And so she said, no, we need to fight crime by fighting poverty. And she was asked to run because she had brought her transit workers union local. She was a public transit bus driver into what was called the Wisconsin Uprising, when the governor of Wisconsin tried to get rid of collective bargaining rights for public employees.
Yeah, Scott Walker, if I could recall correctly.
Right, that's Scott Walker. Yeah. And even though transit workers were exempt from his attack, she mobilized her local to go from Milwaukee over to Madison, the state capital, and participate. And her union president made her the legislative director of her union for that. And she got them involved in the Occupy movement later that year, and basically got them involved in fighting for public transit funding and transit riders' rights. And so she ran for sheriff. She got running as an independent socialist. She got 20% of the vote. And so I met her that year because I was running for governor of New York, and they had a panel in Chicago about independent left politics. And then we were on a panel together the next year. And, you know, I've stayed in touch with her. I know her. You know, people were saying, well, who are you going to, they were suggesting people to be my running mate. You know, minor personalities that I don't know. I know Angela. I know she's a good teammate, and that's what she's been.
Hmm.
And so that was the first criterion, for me, as somebody I could work with. And she's done a great job, even though she's driving a dump truck now in South Carolina. And some days the workday is 15 hours, like yesterday.
Yeah.
So
someone with an
like that,
actual worker's background who knows
yeah.
the struggle from personal experience.
Well, that's something we both bring to this election. I mean, we've been workers. We know what the working class has been going through in this country, where life expectancies of working class people are in decline here because of growing inequality, 45 years of stagnant wages, housing and healthcare costs going through the roof. And so the two major parties, they're out of touch with us as workers.
Yeah. Well, that's hard to disagree on, but if I could ask you a little bit about, I've been reading about that you present yourself as the guy with the original Green New Deal, and that's become a really, hot topic these days with at least a lot of Democrats trying to sound very green. In Denmark, there's a competition between all of the major parties. We don't have a Trump, so all our parties are on the green bandwagon trying to sound green. But how would you characterize your Green New Deal, and how would you say that it differentiates from, for example, Bernie Sanders's model, or maybe some of Joe Biden's weak points about that?
Well, we call it an eco-socialist Green New Deal because in order to make the transition we need to make, in the time frame we need to make it, which is about a decade, we need public planning, public enterprise in particularly the energy, transportation, and manufacturing sectors in order to transform not just how we produce the energy with renewables, solar and wind, but how we use the energy in manufacturing and agriculture, buildings, and transportation. The energy production is only 27% of the carbon footprint in the United States. And so you've got to change technologies like production of cement. And most of it's Portland cement. They put calcium carbonate in there. Calcium hardens the cement, but the carbonate evaporates as carbon dioxide. That's 5% of the world's global carbon footprint. So we need a new way of making cement, new way of making steel, chemicals, everything. So we have a detailed budget which estimates what it'll cost in each sector and how many jobs it will create. And our budget is 10 years, $27.5 trillion. And it creates 38 million jobs. The only serious program that anybody else has put forward was Bernie Sanders. His was 16.3 trillion over 10 years. And we think his numbers are about right. We show our homework. You can go to our budget and see where we got our numbers.
Yeah.
He just presented the conclusions, but they looked about right because he has a slower timeline. He gets to 100% clean energy in transportation in 10 years, but then takes another 20 years to deal with manufacturing, agriculture, and buildings. So his was serious, and we give him credit for that. The rest of the Democrats, they were not serious. And Joe Biden was the worst. And the climate plan we now have from the Democrats, well, first of all, he repudiates the Green New Deal. I mean, he made that clear in the first presidential debate, if anybody hadn't been paying attention. But his policy is actually pro-fossil fuels.
But what do you think is, I'm sorry, but what do you think is the reason for someone like Joe Biden refuting a Green New Deal, like you say? Because from our perspective, at least, it seems really weird to be like actively against this when it's like glaringly obvious to almost everyone in the world that we really need to act now. So is it because Biden has like some corporate interest that he needs to serve, or what's his rationale?
I think that's part of it. The Democratic National Committee in August 2018 recommitted to taking money from the oil and gas industry into what they call an all-of-the-above energy policy, which means, yeah, we'll build some wind generators and solar panels, but we're also going to frack the hell out of the country for oil and gas.
Yeah.
And Obama, to this day, brags about how he made the United States the #1 producer of oil and gas. and fracking is the way they did that. And Biden, he made clear, and his running mate Kamala Harris made clear in her debate, they don't want to ban fracking. And so even the non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ed Markey put into Congress, they took our slogan, Green New Deal, and diluted the content. They eliminated the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure. They eliminated the phase out of nuclear power. They eliminated the cuts in military spending so we can devote more resources to the Green New Deal. And they extended the deadline from 2030 to 2050 for zero emissions. And then Pelosi, the Democratic leader in the House, never let them vote on it. McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, said, we want you to vote on it because half you senators are running for president. We want you on the record. And all the Democrats voted present, except 4 of them voted no with the Republicans.
Okay.
So I think there are 2 things going on here. One is industry influence. The other is the Democrats don't know how to fight the right. Because as soon as the Green New Deal went viral after the midterms when they sat in Pelosi's office, the Republicans said it costs too much, you're going to lose jobs. And instead of defending the program, which actually creates jobs, and it costs more not to make this transition than to make it, the Democrats folded. They pander or accommodate what the Republicans say. They don't fight them head on. Okay. And I think that's the biggest reason.
Yeah, okay. So what you're saying is that it's actually more about Joe Biden trying to reach over the center, so to speak, and grab the conservative votes instead of like defining an actual left-wing position or like a more left-leaning position. So that's just a result of him trying to please his middle voters, if you will.
It's not even middle voters. He's trying to avoid issues altogether. I mean, when you think of Joe Biden, what's he promising people he's going to do? His whole campaign is, I'm not Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Which, is a positive, but it's not enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. So I want to ask you a little bit about, you mentioned before that military spending was also included in this. I recently read a report that the United States military actually pollutes more than 140 nations, like separately, not combined, but still like the pollution level from the military industrial complex alone is bigger than that. So I'm thinking if you'd like to maybe segue a little into foreign policy and how you see the current state of affairs and how the U.S. foreign policy would change with you at the helm.
Well, we put a lot more emphasis on diplomacy than arms, aid, not arms. The U.S. has a global military empire. We have combat troops engaged right now in 14 conflicts. We have 800 foreign military bases. And that's not about protecting the American people and our territory. That's about making the world safe for profit making by global banks and corporations based in the United States. It's an enormous waste of resources, not just the carbon emissions, but all the scientists and engineers and factories and workers that are devoted to making weapons or patrolling the world on behalf of these corporations. Yeah. So we want 75% cut in military spending to start. We'd still have the world's largest military budget. We want to get out of these, what we call endless wars. We want an orderly withdrawal from our forward bases. We want to pledge no first use of nuclear weapons, begin disarming to a minimum credible deterrent, and then address the new nuclear arms race. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has their doomsday clock the closest it's ever been to midnight in the whole nuclear era. We were off to the races, a new nuclear arms race. The United States started deploying faster, 6 times faster strategic nuclear weapons, more tactical nukes and conventional forces with a crazy military doctrine called escalate to de-escalate. So if you're in a conventional fight and you're losing, you use tactical nukes and then you de-escalate, like the other side's going to do that.
Yeah.
And now Russia has that doctrine. I mean, we're really in a dangerous situation. So
from what I hear from you is that other countries are sort of mirroring the U.S. foreign policy, and by the U.S. implementing this escalation policy, others are feeling forced to adapt to this same policy, if I'm understanding you
Yeah,
correctly.
that's right. So it's wasting resources. It's got us on a nuclear hair trigger. And so what we're saying is, let's be the world's humanitarian superpower instead of its global military empire. Let's provide aid and not arms. Let's make friends instead of enemies. Let's use carrots instead of the stick of, occupying military force.
Yeah.
And help to reduce tensions. And by taking a lower military posture and bringing our troops home, then we can go to the other nuclear powers and say, let's get rid of these nuclear weapons. Let's have complete and mutual nuclear disarmament, because we never want these used. If they're used, we're all done. And we can go there with world public opinion. 122 nations have agreed to the text of a treaty on a prohibition of nuclear weapons. That was 3 years ago, and the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. Now, maybe people in Denmark know that, but nobody hardly in the United States knows that.
Yeah.
Because both parties, Democrats and Republicans, are committed to what they call nuclear modernization and the forward military basing. They both want to overthrow the government in Venezuela and install their own guy. There was a coup in Bolivia. There's no criticism from either party.
Yeah,
they
also
have
Christian fanatic, Aziz or Janine Aziz, or what's her name? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we have a very different position than the two major parties. And that's one area where they pretty much agree. It's hard to find any difference between the Democrats and Republicans on foreign and military policy.
Yeah, I'm hearing these debates with Joe Biden and Trump, and it's like, it sounds like a tough guy, a strongman competition about who is going to be more tough on China, for instance, and who's going to be even more strict on Venezuela or Latin America. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, just speaking of China, the saber rattling and all the bellicose talk, that just reinforces the nationalist narrative of the Chinese Communist Party, which they use to justify their violation of human rights and democracy.
Yeah.
So it's counterproductive, but I don't think the ruling class in this country is really interested in human rights and democracy. It's more about China as a potential competitor in global capitalism.
Yeah.
So we need a very different approach. I think you can, criticize China on human rights and democracy grounds, at the same time say, look, we got common problems we got to address together. The climate crisis, the nuclear arms race, and the diversion of resources that could be used for taking care of people in the planet to military ends, which is, extremely wasteful. Yeah.
Okay, it's very interesting to hear you talk about this, but I have a couple of other questions, so I'll try to move a little on. So I'm thinking, I've been reading a little about you, and as you also described, you're a lifelong trade unionist, and I'm thinking, when I follow U.S. politics, I see a somewhat uptick in strikes, or at least in strikes with some effect. I'm thinking, for instance, the strikes in California, and also the teacher strikes in, I believe it was West Virginia, which actually was kind of fruitful. So at the same time, I'm reading articles about how union organization numbers are down in the U.S. I sent you the link to an article in The Guardian. So I'm thinking, what is your perspective on unions in the U.S. and how strong they are?
Well, I think most of the unions, with a couple of exceptions, they don't organize their own members, to take job actions. I mean, the teacher strikes were led by the rank and file, not the union leadership. In fact, my running mate for governor, she was lieutenant governor running mate, Gia Lee, was one of the people that trained these teachers in West Virginia and Oklahoma, Puerto Rico, and some other states. On taking that job action. So I think the problem is the leadership, they don't educate their members, they don't organize their members. When they have a fight with a company, they tend to hire outside consultants to do a public relations campaign to try to embarrass the company. So they're not relying on the potential power of working people. And I don't think that's going to change until we do have a left party that has a perspective on how to organize in the unions and can reform these unions so they actually have real democracy and an orientation toward organizing, not what most of them do is provide services. I
So
mean, most people feel their union is like the insurance company. Your dues are like a premium and you get some benefits.
Yeah.
But other than that, you don't hear from your union.
So just like a passive membership that you pay some money and they'll take care of something for you. So what
Right.
if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like you're saying that there's a bureaucratic layer in the unions that's actually almost harmful to like the perspective of organizing people and making people more militant, or what we should say, more engaged in their own struggles.
Yeah, and it's entrenched. They don't want the members organized because when union elections come around, they might elect new leadership. So they'd rather have us atomized and disengaged than organized.
Yeah.
And that's a structural problem that we've got to address.
Mm.
I think the other thing going on is there's a lot of worker activity going on outside organized labor.
Mm.
We have worker centers that organize immigrants and people in low-wage sectors or in sectors that, like hospitality, restaurant industry. There are a lot of small shops or workplaces that are hard to organize, but they've done a lot in that area, and in agricultural workers. And that's where you see a lot of activity. And then in the COVID period, workers in, the logistics, the, delivering packages. So, Amazon, there've been wildcat strikes among Amazon workers.
Yeah. And I saw that Amazon was actually hiring people to and they were just admitting this openly, but they were hiring people for doing negative PR on on unions. So they must be aware that there is some potential within their working class.
Yeah, and having been a Teamster, there are two giant companies that the Teamsters should be organizing. That's FedEx and Amazon. And there's some efforts here and there, but it's not a major campaign. And that's their core industry. And that's the kind of thing a vibrant labor movement would be doing.
Yeah.
But mostly it's defensive. Between labor laws and the attacks on public employees like Wisconsin, and who Trump has appointed to the National Labor Relations Board. It's a very difficult environment, so the unions are just sort of hunkered down trying to keep what they got.
Yeah. Okay. So if I can just go over to a slightly different topic here, but also something regarding the broken nature of the organization in the U.S., as I would say it, the electoral system. Like, a lot of people would probably think that voting for you would be like a vote for Trump, especially in swing states, because of this duopolic nature of it. So what are your thoughts on that argument? Like, what would be the positive argument for voting for the Green Party, even though, in spite of this argument, you could say?
Well, first of all, a vote for the Green Party is not a vote for Trump. It's in another column. Most of our voters are disgusted with both parties. They don't come out to vote for Democrats or Republicans. To assume if we were not on the ballot, our voters would vote for Biden it's just not borne out by the facts. The exit polls from 2016 showed that 61% of the voters for the Green candidate for President, Jill Stein, would have stayed home. They wouldn't have voted. So we bring voters to the polls. And then the reason to vote for us is, we're for a Green New Deal, Biden and Trump are not.
Yeah.
We're for Medicare for all, Biden and Trump are not. We're for a job guarantee, Biden and Trump are not.
So you're saying this narrative is actually false, that you're like leeching votes from the Democratic Party, as a lot of, I know, Danish pundits are arguing, at least.
Yeah, that's the dominant narrative, and it's mostly wrong. Of course, there are Greens who, if we weren't on the ballot, would vote for Biden to get rid of Trump, understandably. But if everybody does that, and the Greens, one thing that happens in our presidential elections is the vote we get in 40 of the 50 states determines whether we even have a ballot line after the election.
Okay.
And in this country, I don't know what it is in Denmark, but if you want to run for Congress, the House, in this country, In most states, it's thousands or tens of thousands of signatures.
Mm.
You want to run for the House of Commons in England, it's 10 signatures. You want
Yeah,
to run for Congress in India?
In Denmark, it's 20,000 signatures, and we are a country of 5 million, just to give a perspective.
20,000 to run for your national parliament?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's high.
It's fairly high, yeah. But I'm also thinking, this argument, would you feel differently about it if it was Bernie Sanders on the Democratic ticket?
We would still run. You know, the discussion we just had of U.S. militarism and imperialism, Bernie really was weak on that.
Yeah.
And his program is really what we used to call New Deal liberalism.
Mm.
He wants to tax the billionaire class to fund social programs. And we say that's not enough, because as long as the billionaire class has concentrated economic power, it translates into concentrated political power. And I'm not just talking about funding campaigns and paying for lobbyists. I'm talking about the fact that they can decide to invest or not invest, and basically undermine any reforms that are made. And that power is outside the electoral arena. That's why we say we need eco-socialism to have political democracy. Yeah. We need economic democracy to have political democracy. So we want to socialize major means of production so that people share the ownership and the benefits of these enterprises, rather than having an elite take all the wealth, and that translates into political power. So we're really talking about a democratic socialism. His democratic socialism is more like a welfare state capitalism.
Yeah, it will probably be closer to what we would in Danish terms call a social democrat. I think it would be fair to say that Bernie Sanders would be somewhere on the left side of the social democrats in Denmark. So you could say that the actual communists in Denmark would probably say we need to abolish the ownership over the means of production on private hands. Would you go that far and to say we need to abolish the private ownership of the production means of production?
Well, I would say socialize it, which means you'd have public enterprises in the public sector, particularly for large industries and large banks, but you'd also have social ownership, democratic ownership in the private sector in the form of cooperatives. Mm-hmm. So it depends on the industry, and you know, and I've argued that if we have an economic bill of rights, so people have health care, housing, jobs, income, we'll have more people who want to start, you know, their own businesses, bring ideas to market or whatever their thing is, because they can fall back on that economic bill of rights if they fail. Whereas now, I mean, when I worked as a Teamster, most people worked there for the health care. And some people just wouldn't take another job because they'd lose their health care. We had farmers in there who'd work the fields during the day and unload or load trucks at night just for the health care. Or people want to, you know, they want to start a construction business, or they're plumbers and they'd like to do that, but they can't get the health care affordably, so they work at UPS.
In Denmark, we have a system called flex security, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but it's basically like making a flexible job market due to having the security to fall back on, for example, healthcare and like getting some public support if you're unemployed and so forth. And that means that you are much more flexible in terms of looking for another job and willing to risk other jobs and so forth. So this flex security model is also what I'm hearing you advocate a little for here, that people wouldn't be as chained to their jobs at Amazon or whatever.
Right, and that gives them stronger bargaining power on the job. And if they do want to go into business for themselves, they can take that risk and know that it won't be the end of the world if they fail.
Yeah, absolutely. So Howie, I can see that we're slightly running out of time, so I'm not going to hold you up too much longer, but just two quick questions here at the end. Let's assume for a minute that you do win the presidency. What are the first three things you're going to focus on?
Well, I declare a climate emergency, which would give the president powers to coordinate all federal agencies to deal with the climate crisis.
Hmm.
I would free the migrants and asylum seekers from detention, reunite families, provide them with the services they need, give them documents so they're not undocumented,
Hmm.
and then speed up the process that exists for them to become immigrants or people with asylum.
Would you
Uh,
also give them voting rights?
that would be citizenship. There should be a clear path to citizenship.
Yeah.
I leave it up to municipalities. I mean, there are whole municipalities with majority immigrant populations, and they should certainly have a say over, municipal issues in their schools, the
Yeah.
school boards. So then I would pardon a lot of people. We have millions of nonviolent drug offenders.
Hmm.
They need, if they're addicted, drug treatment, not, prison.
Yeah.
There's Julian Assange, a publisher, who's, if he gets convicted the way they're convicting him, every news organization will be in trouble if they get anything leaked from the government, which is how we find out what the government is up to most of the time. I would not only pardon or drop the charges on Edward Snowden, I would ask him to come into the administration, because I think he's got the technical knowledge, and he's got perspective on legitimate intelligence collection without violating our constitutional rights.
Mm.
And he has a commitment to democracy over authoritarianism,
Yeah.
which I really admire. His book, Permanent Record, was the most powerful book I read last year.
Mm.
We have political prisoners, Leonard Peltier, Mumia Abu-Jamal, and many elderly people from the Black Panther Party and others.
I saw that Jalil Muntakim was just released after 49 years in prison last week, I think it was.
Yeah, I mean, these people are in prison long after other people, if not for political reasons, would have been, released by now. So a lot of people will be freed.
Mm.
And there are other things. I mean, there's so much that needs to be done.
Yeah, that's great starting points, I think.
Yeah, there are probably over 100 Trump executive orders that I would repeal.
Yeah, that's
we have a busy first day.
Well, let me hear just at the end here. I know a lot of people probably remember Jill Stein from the campaigns in 2012 and 2016. How would you say the main differences between the Green Party that Jill Stein represented and the Green Party that you and Angela are representing, or trying to move the party in a direction of under your leadership? How would you outline that just briefly?
Well, I think the commitment of the Green Party to an ecological socialism has been strengthened. It actually adopted a plank saying that was our goal when Jill ran, but it's much more explicit now. I think that's the main difference. Okay. It was implicit in her programs, her platform, but now people are talking about, capitalism as a system versus an alternative system, whereas before we were just talking about particular reforms. Mm. And so I think that's the main difference between where the Green Party was 4 years ago and today.
Okay. Well, that's I'm really appreciative of your time, Howie. So great to borrow a little from your busy schedule. Is there anything you'd like to add at the end here? Anything you think the Danish audience should know that we haven't covered?
Well, I think what people don't understand is in this country, we don't really have political parties like other countries. When people become a Democrat or Republican, they don't join a party organization. They tell the state. They tell the state, I want to register in this party. Or in some states, you don't even do that. You just show up at a primary and say, I want the Democratic ballot or the Republican ballot or the Green ballot. Mm. So they're very top down. They're like the original political parties, like in England, the Whigs and the Tories. They were factions of the parliament when workers couldn't even vote, and they had wealthy sponsors. And so they'd mobilize their vote from the top down. That's what the Democrats and Republicans still do. If you have a problem that you want to address, you can't go to the local chapter of the Democratic or Republican Party and talk about it. Mm. And I think there's a political vacuum there that what we really need in this country is a first party, a mass membership party with local branches, mm-hmm. where people, that's the future of the Green Party, I think. We had over 100 million people not vote in the last presidential election. Mm. They're disproportionately working class, people of color and young people.
Yeah. So
That's the future of a party.
Yeah.
So we got to organize as a mass membership party and be relevant to those people. So they know us, they trust us because we're right there in the neighborhood.
Are you also, just to clear it up, are you getting funding through how many ballots you get? Like, do you receive a proportion of funding for that? That's the way it is in Denmark. So
No, there is funding for presidential elections. This dates back to post-Watergate reforms. Mm-hmm. One of them is called primary matching funds. And I'm the only candidate in the country. None of the Democrats, none of the Republicans, none of the other third parties sought that. We raised enough money in enough states to qualify. So that matches contributions up to $250 each.
Okay.
We submitted our application. We haven't had it accepted yet by the Federal Election Commission.
Okay.
So that's one pot of public money that the Democrats and Republicans won't take now, because if you accept that public money, you're limited to $50 million spending on your primaries. And they're spending many times more of that. Bernie Sanders, I think he raised 200 or 300 million, Joe Biden now. So it's not enough money for them, but it's big for us. But unfortunately, the Democrats have a bill that if they become the majority in Congress are going to pass that will increase by 5 times the amount of money we need to raise to qualify for that matching funds program.
Okay. Like, is that
a hard time
to sabotage your efforts, do you think?
Yeah, I think they don't want public funding of a third party.
Okay. Wow.
And their own people, they get too much, money from corporations, and we have a thing called dark money, where we don't know who makes contribution, goes to a certain kind of nonprofit, doesn't have to report their contributors, and that nonprofit can spend some money on politics, and then it can give money to what they call a super PAC, political action committee, that reports the money came from that nonprofit. But you don't know the original source.
Yeah.
Could be a, private equity billionaire, could be a sheik in, the Middle East, could be anybody.
I read Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money. That's really depressing reading when you see how the money is channeled into mainly the Republican Party there.
Yeah, we have we call it legalized bribery. We have massive corruption in our elections.
Yeah. Well, on that joyful note, I want to thank you very much again, Howie, for being with us, and I wish you the best of luck with your campaign.
Well, thank you.
And have a good day.
You too.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.